Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard, and welcome to the World Ender Seasonal Tournament edition of Tournament Tactician. Now, last week I put together a sort of thrown together tier list, reintroduced myself into the meta, and honestly it wasn't too far off of what we ended up seeing. Here is the full breakdown of the top 8, you can find it on my Twitter, and if you just want to look at the actual deck lists as well as the lineups that the players had, get a little bit more nitty gritty with it, then there will be a link in the description below for the deck sheet that was used. It has the top 8, all of their lineups, that kind of stuff, so you can get your hands on the deck list, because there are a few things that were in the top 8 that are not on the tier list, most notably Seraphine and of course Talia Malphite. Shout out to Grandpa Roji. Seraphine's not on the tier list because I feel like if Seraphine wins this seasonal, we as a community went horribly wrong somewhere. I was not impressed by the Seraphine decks that I saw. They were different variants. There was a Twisted Fate variant, and then there was a more traditional sort of Pursuit of Perfection Aphelios variant. So I'm still pretty down on Seraphine, which feels weird to say given that like Sundisk is still on the tier list, because the point of the tier list has always been decks on here can win the tournament, and I don't think Seraphine should be winning the seasonal. Not sure Sundisk should either, but there is a universe where it happens, whereas Seraphine, I feel like there just isn't, unless like every good player suddenly decides they're on Seraphine. But the Aatrox and Jinx are still very much the star of the show. Kayn Aatrox being the boogeyman of the format, very much so, taking up 5 of those top 8 spots. And what Kayn Aatrox has going for it over Vayne Aatrox Quinn is a much better aggro matchup and a much better late game, in the sense that you have so much healing between these two champions. Kayn, obviously, once you get into the Darken mode, which is Rost, you're going to be healing 2 every time it's either kill a unit or strike with him. I don't even remember. And then Aatrox actually will be going ahead and healing you 2 when you summon him as well as when you strike. And that just gives you an insane amount of stabilization on top of the keeper of the box that you get in there. So you're much better against aggro. And then I feel like Vayne Aatrox Quinn will outscale Kayn Aatrox in the late game if your Vayne survives into the late game. If you can get a level 2 Vayne and it's like turn 7, turn 8, and you're constantly churning out like 0 mana tumbles, then yeah, Vayne Aatrox Quinn will probably take the late game, but I don't think that actually happens too often, and you just get more strike spells out of Kayn Aatrox because of the Furious Wielder. Just such a good spell. So there are some Vayne Aatrox Quinn purists out there. Kayn Aatrox definitely going to be the more popular variant. Definitely going to be the most popular deck of the event. My guess is going to be, it's kind of hard to say because there is a second relatively popular version of Aatrox, but I'm going to go ahead and say we're looking at about 16 to 18 Kayn Aatrox specifically. For Aatrox in general, I'm expecting somewhere in the 22 to 24 range. I'm really not expecting like an insane amount of Vayne Quinn Aatrox. Echo Jinx turned out to be the more popular Jinx deck, which makes sense because when you break down into the stats a little bit, and I know usually I'll have like the matchup charts of everything into the best 2 decks, I don't think it's actually particularly pertinent on this seasonal. The seasonal is very straightforward. I think people are really baiting themselves into overthinking it. But Echo Jinx actually wins the head-to-head on the other 2 Jinx decks, which is one of the reasons I think you are seeing it so often in lineups. And as far as Jinx goes, it's hard to imagine an Echo deck breaking 16 players into the top 16. I'm going to go ahead and guess somewhere around like the 12 to 13 range for Echo Jinx specifically. And when we talk about Jinx specifically, I could see as high as like 19, 20, somewhere in that range. Just throwing out some guesses here, some arbitrary predictions, so to speak. Draven Jinx really hasn't been showing up, and aggro as a whole has been not showing up, but I do see a lot of people, like they usually do, really contemplating that last minute swap over to aggro, probably looking at something like Draven Jinx, though I think Lulu Jinx fits into an aggro lineup just as well as Draven Jinx does, and I was really hoping that Draven Jinx had something going for it, maybe in terms of like beating the other Jinx decks in the head-to-head, but no, this is not only the order of popularity for these, but this is also the order in which they win the matchups. Echo Jinx beats both of them, and then Lulu Jinx is beating Draven Jinx, at least on the stats that I saw on Runeterra AR. So aggro's been having a little bit of a weird time. There was no Leona anywhere in the top 8 of the Mastering Runeterra Open. I don't even know how close it got, and I can't tell if this is like, you know, maybe now that the meta's a little bit more settled, people are more confident in the Aatrox Jinx lineups, that now we'll see aggro be a little bit more of a surprise factor at the seasonal than it was at the Mastering Runeterra Open. But I still like the Leona Aphelios version more, but again, I'm just really not a big aggro proponent. But what the Leona Cat does have going for it, you know, being Targon and Noxus, is you've got a lot of stuns for these champions that need to go into combat in order to actually heal, so the Kayn Aatrox. So I think that's what people are looking to target, which I'm not sure if that's really the way to go, man. It seems so weird to say that, like, yeah, you target the deck with the healing in it as opposed to, like, Echo Jinx. But I do think that if these are our top 2 decks, if most of the lineups are going to be Kayn Aatrox, Echo Jinx, and then X, which will be sort of the lineup, right? It's like, it's Aatrox Kayn, maybe Aatrox Vayne, but for the most part, Aatrox Kayn, Echo Jinx, and then you're just looking for your third deck. And there's a lot of philosophies on what you can do for the third deck, or if you want to play a lineup that counters this. Yang Zera from Mastering Runeterra actually wrote an article very recently. It's under the premium paywall, but I'd highly recommend getting access to those, as Mastering Runeterra puts out some great content on the premium. So definitely check that out. Yang Zera, one of the smartest players in the scene. Definitely go and listen to what he has to say. And if you're already checking out my Tournament Tactician, then I have to assume that you are just like taking in opinions from anybody and everybody, especially respected community members. So if you like Tournament Tactician, definitely go read Yang's article. He goes a little bit more in depth to it. Anyway, this is what we're looking at. I'm not convinced that aggro does super well into this if the players are comfortable on Echo Jinx. I think that Echo Jinx is a weird deck. Echo Zillion was the same way, and it's very possible that like players are getting baited into aggro because their testing partners are not very proficient at the Jinx decks, or maybe not even proficient at the Aatrox Kayn decks, or just like playing it a little bit too greedy, because we have seen a lot of discrepancies in the Aatrox builds. The only weapon that we are consistently seeing 3 of is the Darkened Spear. For the rest of it, you're seeing a lot of variation, a lot of personal preference amongst the weapons and the equipments. The lineup, or the sample list that I have here, are the ones from the January Open. So like I took Tank's Kayn Aatrox build because he won the tournament. I took his little Jinx because he won the tournament. And then I just tried to take like the highest placing for the rest of the sample lists within the tournament, if I could find them. And the X, if we're talking about like the best X for just Aatrox Echo X, I think it is Plunder. A lot of players are starting to praise Plunder for having just like a very solid 50-50 split on a lot of matchups. I think it's a deck that's very strong. When we look at Kayn Aatrox, it's very difficult, nigh impossible even, for you to win the game if your opponent has like a level 2 Sejuani and a warning shot. You know, maybe it takes him a while to actually chew through your board because the level 2 Aatrox is a 9/9 with regen, even if he doesn't have attack points. But I don't know how many Darken you're putting out. Like the aggressiveness of Plunder, there's something to be said about it. And if I was playing Plunder, Aatrox, and Echo, I'd probably be banning Aatrox Kayn. I think that you kind of need to play a much more aggressive early game with the Gangplank Sejuani than you used to, and we're seeing that through the use of like Tusk Speaker and things like that. I'm a little worried that Kayn Aatrox can just stabilize a little bit too hard if I don't really get like my Sejuani game plan online, which is why I actually really like Tank's build. Going for the Babbling Bjergs in the main, I think like tutoring up Sejuani is almost more important than it ever has been, so definitely shout out to Tank on this one. Also, Shell Shocker. Like, you just got to be loading up on 1-drops because everybody is very afraid of the aggro boogeyman. It feels like aggro might not be great, but it is more expected than it has been in a long time, just because we have so many high-performing aggro decks on ladder, much more than we usually do, right? Like, all the Jinx decks have, like, above a 55, or, like, close to a 55% win rate. Leona Katarina still hovering at, like, a 59% win rate or something crazy like that. And then Red Gwen, I think today is actually the most popular deck on ladder. But I want to talk about Red Gwen for a second. I know we're kind of jumping around here. This deck looks so weird to me, man, because it reminds me a lot of, like, Fizz Riven, where you're just kind of, like, all in on this Might, Shunpo. Like, it looks very cheesy now. 3 Mark of the Isle, 3 Might, like that's got to be a cheesy deck, right? And you still got Quietus Ravenous Flock in here to sort of carry you through some weird things, but like I am ultimately not a fan of Red Gwen, and I do want to mention that I feel like Red Gwen and Akshan Varus, I don't really believe in having a 0.5 tier, but these decks almost feel like tier 2.5, where I would never recommend that if you're going for this, the standard lineup, I would never recommend one of these to be your X. I feel like they are just worse than any of these options. Maybe not so much the Leona Katarina. I think this might be a little bit more pigeonholed into certain lineups in my mind, but I think that like Leona Aphelios, a fine choice as well. I just really like Aphelios as a champion. I think this deck has a lot of skill expression in ways that players don't necessarily expect, but that's really not important right now. The point is, I feel like Gwen and Akshan Varus are like, they're very solid. I'm not going to be mad to see them in your lineup. I wouldn't try to talk you out of them, but I'm never going to try to talk you into them either. Where with these decks, I feel like I could. Like I could try to sell you on Leona or FTR or Plunder Nora Vygar, but not so much Gwen and Akshan Varus. They do feel better than all the tier 3 options in my opinion, but they definitely feel tier 2.5. But again, the whole strength of the seasonal tournament is pick your comfort decks. If you've been playing Red Gwen for forever, and then you could try this new version and you were like, yeah, I jive with this, absolutely stick the Red Gwen in there. Stick with what you know. Akshan Varus Sivir popped up at the tournament. It got 2 top 8 spots. It wasn't like I didn't forget about it, but it seemed kind of dead and gone. And one of the players in the top 8 with it was Grandpa Roji, who has been running this deck. Not like Roji's been on the same lineup of Aatrox, Vayne Quinn, Akshan Varus Sivir, and Talia Malphite pretty much since the World Championship qualifiers, and just has not deviated from that. So I almost don't want to count his Akshan Sivir Varus as like a top for the deck in terms of trying to get other people onto it, but just be aware of that information. FTR Nora Vygar is a cool lineup. Just control in general feels pretty good. You're really not seeing as much like Draven Jinx and Lulu Jinx, so I don't think you need to go for the sweepers. I think you actually can play like the greedier version. But again, the problem with the Swiss rounds is that it is always going to come down to what you actually play, not what the field is playing. Because the field could be, 1,000 players are all on Aatrox and Jinx, and you come to hard target this, and then for 9 rounds you just play against the 24 players in the tournament that did not bring Aatrox Jinx. And honestly, the best way to do it is just play the field and enter as many tournaments as possible, and eventually your day will come as long as you have solid play. And it feels bad on the days where it doesn't work out like that. But that's why I never really recommend like counter lineups in seasonals, especially because I feel like even if Aatrox Jinx X, like let's say Aatrox Jinx Plunder is just like hands down tier 0 lineup, for the sake of argument, is obviously not. But let's say for the sake of argument, it's like a tier 0 lineup. I still wouldn't expect more than like 60% of the field to be Aatrox Jinx Plunder lineups. People love to think that they can beat these things or just throw you off your game in the ban strategy or overvalue aggro, or it really comes down to their personal testing. So I wouldn't put too much stock in like the fact that everybody is teetering on aggro. Very few of them I think are actually going to land on the coin flip side of aggro. The only player who, like, when they say they're thinking about aggro, I take them seriously is probably What Am I, because he's the only one that I have seen consistently swap between aggro and other styles of play. But I don't think What Am I would go aggro for the open rounds even. He tends to very much be on his own game plan in the open rounds, and then like for top cut, maybe he'll swap to aggro if he thinks that, that's a strategy, because we've seen him do that before multiple times even, I think, at least twice if memory serves. But all that to say, I think that FTR, Nora Vygar, and Plunder are all absolutely phenomenal third deck options. I think they just have a lot of strength into the field. They have a lot of decent play patterns. If I had to rank them, I would actually go Plunder number 1, Nora Vygar number 2, FTR number 3, and then Leona number 4. Again, like I just really haven't seen this deck perform too much. We haven't seen it in tournament, and I almost feel like Leona, Red Gwen, and like Lurk are really starting to get kind of baity in that they just have like very impressive ladder stats and then don't do anything in tournament. So I really have like no read on how much Leona we are going to see in the top cut of the seasonal, because we did not see it at all at the Mastering Runeterra Open. We didn't get to spectate any of it. It was nowhere near the top 8. I mean, it might have been like in the top 16 and some players that we didn't see, but like just never got them on camera. So yeah, Leona's a bit of a question mark for me. But if I had to guess like numbers 3 through 5 on the decks, I would say FTR is probably going to be number 3 in popularity. I think players are still just like kind of weirdly wishy-washy on Plunder. I think Plunder might even come in at number 5, probably around like 10 on Plunder. Nora Vygar probably going to be closer to 12, and FTR I don't actually expect to be too above Nora Vygar. So if we're looking at our top 5 for the event, this is kind of what I'm expecting, is like 16 to 18 specifically on like Kayn Aatrox, and then like 12 to 13 on Echo Jinx, 12-ish on like Nora Vygar and FTR. This actually might even be more like 10, 10, 9, somewhere around that range. It's kind of what I'm feeling. So if you want to know what the field looks like, it is going to be Aatrox and Jinx number 1 and 2. Definitely the Kayn Aatrox and the Echo Jinx as those options. And then, yeah, FTR, Nora Vygar, Plunder. I feel like players are kind of split on these. You might not even see them in the same lineup all the time. Like, I don't think you have to go triple control right now. I think you just need to like play a straightforward game and just be good at the Aatrox, Kayn, the Echo Jinx, and whatever third deck you decide to bring. I think this is actually like a very, very straightforward seasonal. And when we get into tier 3, it's like this is just kind of comfort picks for people. Annie Jhin really hasn't been performing well, and for a while this was actually the boogeyman of aggro. Like if you were playing against a triple aggro lineup, Annie Jhin was the ban 100% of the time for like, I want to say 2 formats, and now it feels like you'd probably end up banning the Leona Katarina, maybe the Gwen Katarina, just because like they're so cheesy. And you can't look at this deck and tell me this isn't cheesy, right? When you're on triple might, triple mark, that's got cheese written all over it, which is why I'm a little disrespectful of the deck. Definitely am not as in love with it as I was as the previous iteration of Red Gwen, and I'm putting in like Akshan Varus tier in terms of should it be in your lineup. But that's like, I don't think I actually have too much to say past that. Like I said, I feel like this is actually a very straightforward seasonal, and you shouldn't be overthinking things too much. Like, just play your solid decks, play your game. Mid-range seems to be king right now. You just have so much late game that you haven't had in the past to go toe-to-toe with things like the FTR and the Nora Vygar. It is what it is. I don't know if Nora Vygar is really going to be like wiping your board with Destinatas in a way that like Aatrox is really scared of, or Jinx can't just rally and come back from. So yeah, I mean, personally, I like Plunder as the number 3 deck, but I think the community is going to end up on like an FTR Nora Vygar split. But all this tier 3 stuff like doesn't feel great to me. It's all like comfort stuff. TF Swing and Conservatory, like their stats into the best decks, not looking great. But again, test, figure out what works for you. You know, you can flip the stats if you know something about the matchup that someone else doesn't, or you put in a tech card that like isn't being run on ladder because the stats are only being accumulated from ladder. But I feel like I'm really just starting to sound like a broken record here, seasonal in and seasonal out. And yeah, I could maybe stretch this out for another 20 minutes, but it doesn't really feel like I need to. So hopefully some of that information was helpful to you. Sorry to kind of rush you through this one. Again, I'm still kind of dipping my feet back in the water and getting back into an analysis mode. And yeah, this is kind of where I've landed for this seasonal. But thank you so much for watching. As always, you can find links in the description below to Yang Zera's article, as well as the top 8 breakdown of the Mastering Runeterra event. If you just want to look at that, draw your own conclusions, as well as this tier list. It is in my link tree in the description below. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you found some of this helpful. And as always, good luck in the World Ender Seasonal Tournament.